Chapter 29. Remember when we first found her? Miss Christabel asked. Remember that day, Timothy John? They had been downstairs then. Found her where? Maggie asked. Remember that day? What are you talking about? How do you know about the ballerina? But neither doll answered. How nice that she came back, Timothy John said. She didn't come back, Maggie said, raising her voice. I gave her to you. She's a present. I got her. She was mine, sort of. And I gave her to you as a present. The surfaces of her eyes began to sting. It was supposed to be a surprise, she added, her voice catching. It was, Timothy John said. I never thought we'd see her again, Miss Christabel put in. Selina. And she leaned forward, and she leaned towards the figurine until their foreheads met with a little click. Again? Maggie demanded. What do you mean again? When did you see her before? Once more the dolls remained silent. When? Maggie repeated. Look, Timothy John said. If we stand next to the sugar bowl, she can lean on its edge when she grows tired. She might tip it over, Miss Christabel objected. Not if it's weighted down with sugar, which it always is, Timothy John assured her. When? Maggie asked again. Timothy John, Miss Christabel said. We must give Maggie her present now. And in a minute she returned from the clothes chest with a small package wrapped in the same yellow paper that had covered the doll's best clothing. Happy anniversary, she said, handing it over. Happy anniversary, Timothy John repeated, and both dolls drew closer as Maggie began to unfold the paper. Oh, she said at last, a handkerchief of my very own, and she spread the tiny square cloth on her knee and looked at it a long time, smoothing it out now and then with the edge of her hand. Somehow the design looked familiar, roses and stems weaving in and out, in and out. She had seen that somewhere, on the border of a page or the edge of a gown. Where? I've never had a real handkerchief before, she said. Just the paper kind you blow your nose in and throw away. She couldn't remember when anyone had given her a real present before. It's beautiful, she said, and she slipped it under the elastic of her cuff. Look, Miss Christabel, now I'm just like you. And she held her arm next to the flowered handkerchief in the doll's sleeve. Just, Miss Christabel agreed. But we must get on with the party, Timothy John said, and he removed the little gold watch from his waistcoat pocket. It's growing late, he said. 8:35 at night. The last time I looked, it was 8:35 in the morning. It's neither, Maggie said. That watch always says 8:35. That explains why it's always growing late, Timothy John replied. Come, let us begin. And they all sat down at the table with its ribbon streamers and best dishes while Timothy John arranged juniper under his parasol next to the ballerina. First, we'll have ice cream, Maggie began. Ice cream? Miss Christabel asked. But we have no ice cream. Yes, we do. Maggie set out 3 bowls and laid little spoons next to them. It's butter pecan, she said, spooning from a larger bowl. Timothy John and Miss Christabel bent over the table. But the bowls are empty, they both cried together. Well, it's pretend, Maggie answered, like the tea and the cream and sugar and all that. Pretend tea? Miss Christabel asked. Do we have pretend tea, Timothy John? Timothy John looked into the teapot. No, he replied, not today, but perhaps I can find some for next time. Maggie sighed. Well, this is pretend ice cream, she said. You have to make believe it's really there. Pretend ice cream, Timothy John said. What an excellent idea. That keeps it from melting, Miss Christabel. It sounds very curious to me, Miss Christabel said. I don't believe I've tasted anything pretend before. I hope it isn't bitter. And she hesitantly raised the spoon to her lips. It has a familiar taste, she said after a pause, but I can't quite place it. Let's give some to Juniper, too. And she held the bowl next to the dog's china nose. Just pretend to eat it, she cautioned him. Is the cake pretend, too? Timothy asked. No, the cake is real, and Maggie produced the little cupcake, inserting a candle into its hard crust of icing. That's too bad, Timothy John answered. I seem to be developing a taste for pretend things. Well, it's real, and I brought real matches too, so we can light a candle and sing happy anniversary. She had never struck a match before, and she wasn't altogether sure how to go about it. Sweep it across the sole of your shoe, she remembered, but the match broke in two when she tried that. And she had to use another, this time holding her fingers closer to the head. Over and over, she drew it across the bottom of her shoe, holding her breath, squeezing her eyes shut, so that when it finally did ignite, in a sudden hissing spurt, she let out a surprised cry of pain and dropped it on the table. It's a fire! Timothy John and Miss Christabel jumped from the table. It's another fire! The paper shade of the parasol was by now a blade of flame. and in the next instant nothing remained of its red and purple blossoms but a scattering of ash clinging to its frail blackened ribs. Juniper, knocked aside, lay upside down in a saucer. For a while nothing could be heard but the little clicking noises made by Miss Christabel's china hands as they shook together. "Well," Timothy John finally said, standing Jupiter upright again, "that was close, wasn't it?" And he looked around at Miss Christabel and Maggie. "Close to what?" Miss Christabel asked, smoothing out her skirt. But Maggie couldn't speak at all. She lifted the parasol's bare skeleton and let it drop again. The beautiful flowery sunshade was all gone. Now Juniper had no present, and she felt her throat tighten. "Poor Juniper," she tried to say, but no sound came. "It can still be used," Miss Christabel said. "It can be a transparent sunshade for letting the sun in. When you want to take a sunbath, for example." "A sunshade for sunbaths," Timothy John said. "What an excellent idea. If Juniper takes sunbaths, there's no need to buy him a wash tub." And Juniper growled softly. "But it's all gone," Maggie whispered, "the paper part with the flowers." And once more she felt a sting to her eyes. "But the part that's left is quite nice," Timothy John said, brushing the blackened frame with his china hand. "It's like a little tree." And very carefully he stood it up. "Now," he went on, "isn't there a song that is sung at parties? Happy something." "Happy anniversary," Miss Christabel replied. "Sing it, Maggie." Maggie opened her mouth and tried to sing. The words came out in little spurts at first, but soon Timothy John began to beat time with the ice cream spoon, and Miss Christabel to tap her foot loudly on the floor. "Happy anniversary, dear Miss Christabel, Timothy John, and Juniper," Maggie managed to end in a jumble. "Happy anniversary to you." "It's a lovely song," Timothy John said. "You must teach me the words someday." Then, with a small spoon, Maggie began to divide the hardened cupcake into little pieces. "First Juniper," she said, offering him a large crumb, because his present got ruined. "And next Miss Christabel, then Timothy, and now me." She peeled off the paper, pleading, and sucked on its waxy crumbs. The icing cracked under her teeth when she bit into the cake itself, but she softened it under her tongue and swallowed some of the pieces whole. At her next bite, though, she saw that both dolls were staring at her, their cake pieces poised in front of their lips. "That's a ridiculous way to eat," Timothy John said. There's nothing left when you're done." And after that she ate as they did, making little nibbling noises with her lips and returning the cake to her plate as she did with the wooden slices of bread. At last they put their hands in their laps and sat back, looking from one face to another. That was very nice," Miss Christabel said. "Let's promise something," Maggie said. "Let's promise to have an anniversary party like this every May 14th, with ice cream and cake and a candle. Only I won't light it again, and streamers and presents and singing and everything just like today." "You forgot the games," Timothy John reminded her. "Games!" exclaimed Miss Christabel. "We haven't played games yet. What do you know, Maggie? What games do you know, Maggie?" Maggie thought a while. "Ghost," she finally suggested. "Do you know Ghost?" Both dolls rose in alarm. "Ghost!" they cried. "No, not dead people. Not the dead people kind of ghost," Maggie said. "The spelling game, you know. First I say a letter, and then you say a letter, and you keep going around saying letters until someone spells out a word and that person gets a G for ghost." What do you do with it then?" Timothy John asked. "With what?" "With the G you get." "Nothing." Maggie grew impatient. Whoever gets GHOST first loses." "Loses what?" "Loses the game." "But then it can't be played until it is found." "No, I mean loses like you don't win. It makes no sense." "It's just a spelling game," Maggie shrugged. "It's supposed to teach you how to spell and stuff like that." "I don't care for games that teach you things," Timothy John said. "You think you're having a good time, and all the while you're really learning something instead. Let's play that game. What is it, Miss Christabel?" "The one where someone puts a handkerchief over his eyes and tries to catch someone else." "Ah, that," Miss Christabel answered. "Remember that? Blind Man's Bluff." "What a wonderful game that was, all that bumping into things." "Blind Man's Bluff," Timothy John said. "Of course. Let's play that now. I'll be blind man. Maggie, tie a napkin around my eyes so I can't see." Blind Man's Bluff. She had seen children play that in one of her old schools. She had never played, but she had always wondered what it felt like to move around a room blindfolded, reaching into a tangle of taunting arms, catching nothing. "Tie it so it won't slip down," Timothy John said as Maggie knotted a tea towel around his head. "Now scatter," he ordered. and Miss Christabel swept to the other side of the room. Maggie watched as Timothy John stretched his hands in front of him and moved cautiously, first in one direction, then turning abruptly in the other until he bumped into her knee. "Caught you," he cried, pulling the blindfold down to his chin. But you didn't move," he now said. "Why didn't you move?" "I don't know," Maggie responded. "I was just watching." Timothy John told her, "Keep moving or you'll be caught. Let's try it again." And he pushed the blindfold across his painted eyes. "Scatter," he called out again, and this time Maggie tiptoed over to the other wall while Miss Christabel slipped across the room in her whispering skirt. Once again, he stretched his arm straight ahead and pushed slowly across the floor towards Miss Christabel. As he neared her, she edged away, and in the next instant, he would have crashed into a wall. "Look out," Maggie cried aloud, and he spun around and headed for her knees. "Caught you," he called out, stabbing at her with his china hands. "You shouldn't have spoken," he said, pulling down his blindfold, "but you were about to bump into the wall." "Of course I was," Timothy John answered. "That's the fun of it. Now it's your turn because you were caught. You're a blind man, Miss Christabel. Find a cloth for Maggie's eyes." And in a moment, Maggie was wrapping one of the doll's bed sheets around her own head. At first, everything was silent, and she stood stiffly, seeing nothing but the maroon darkness behind her eyelids. Then, near her hem, she heard the rustle of a skirt and the creak of a knee joint, and she crouched down low, sweeping her hands back and forth. Once her knuckles hit a wall, and later something on the tea table fell over with a thin sound. Miss Christabel's skirt swished somewhere on the right, and Maggie quickly grabbed with her hand, but she met only the wardrobe, and she heard now from the left a tiny laugh. She put out her hands again. This was the table, no, the chair, and here was something hard and cold, the stove. Here was the clothes chest, and this must be the alcove with the broom. The creaking and rustling had gone silent. Where were they? Now there was a rustle, then footsteps. From where? Beyond the doll room and into the attic? "No fair going out of this room," she called out, but there came no answer. Suddenly there was a loud crash, and then two thuds. Maggie put her hand out again. "Caught you," she cried out at last, bunching the folds of a silk dress in her hand. "Caught you." She pulled her blindfold down and squinted into a blur of light. The dress she was clutching slowly came into focus, and she stared at it. It was blue, not black, and it had no buttons. It was big and wide, not tiny, and it stretched far above Maggie's crouched form. Slowly she lifted her gaze until she found herself looking straight into the faces of first of Aunt Harriet and then of Aunt Lillian.